Hello, this is Kathleen. I'm going to make a little demo to show you how to use Adobe Animate to read a soundtrack. You've got a project coming up that requires some lip sync. You can use one of the audio tracks that I'm providing, but I know that some of you want to create your own audio track, and what you're going to need to do is to read the soundtrack somehow so that you can animate to the actual frames where the sounds occur, and that's called reading the soundtrack. So this is what a soundtrack looks like once it's read. This exposure sheet is a timeline, and what's on that timeline are notes that I've written down. I'm looking here in Animate, and if you look up on the top timeline, you can see that we can scrub across this, and it goes you are. What he's saying is,
you are who you choose to be.
That's the entire clip. And what we'll do is take it from the top and say, how do you get the soundtrack into Animate? How do you use the timeline to write these little notes up here that indicate information that you would transfer onto the written exposure sheet? What you'll have is exposure sheets that you can print out that look like this, nice and tidy. It's a PDF, and you could get up to, on all of this, you could go all the way up to 10 seconds or more, because you can write down more numbers, more frame numbers. So essentially there's a frame number, and then there's a place to write down information that you want in these columns, which are just like layers over here in most time-based media. So let's get to it. I've got a blank scene here, and the first thing we'll do is we'll notice that in this one there's already a soundtrack. The way that got in there would be you go to File, Import to Library. The library is where you store assets, and when you do that, you would search for something, and it could be a WAV, an MP3, an AIF. All of these would work. They should work. So you would import that, and right now it's saying I haven't used that. So what I'm going to do here is I've got a blank keyframe on the timeline. So I from the library, I drag it out onto that frame, and you might see that there's a little line there. Maybe you don't see it, but we want to extend the soundtrack all the way down for about 100 frames. So what I'll do is I'll close the little library right now, use the accordion to shrink this down. I'll go out to about 100, and I'll hit the F5 key. Now that shows you there's the waveform. To make that waveform taller, right click next to the name over there, go to the properties, and say you want that up to 300%, and it'll be bigger. And then I'm going to change the name of that to like audio or track, something like that. And then I'm going to put a layer on top of that, and I'll put another layer. While I'm there, I'll put another layer up there. I'm going to lock everything except for this one here. I'm going to just say cues. I'm going to write the word cues, because this is where I'm going to type down some information that will relate to what's happening in the waveform. Now, there's a couple things we need to do before we proceed, and one is we got to make sure we can scrub the timeline. Just grab that blue playhead, scrub through it. And this is a tricky thing. If you don't know about this, you'd be really mad at Adobe Animate. You'd be mad at Adobe, in fact, if you couldn't hear your soundtrack. But Animate's got this little tricky thing called a properties box for everything that's in there. If the properties box isn't there, go up to Window, and it's Control or Command if you're on a Mac, F3. And when you have selected the first frame of that soundtrack, it will tell you what the properties are for the soundtrack. And over here you can see it says sound. If that's toggled, you go like, what's she talking about? It says it's a wave. It's called You Choose Wave. It's a wave soundtrack. And it down here, this is good. It says 44 kilohertz. You do want to use 44 kilohertz files, not 22 or less than that. You just look for something that's 44 kilohertz. But here's the sync. If you had it set to event, look, I'm scrubbing and I can't hear it. And this drives people nuts. So look for that. What that event would be like if somebody hit a button in a game, or a rollover of like a certain part of an interactive site, or something that had to happen first. Like you can code something, one event happens and then it triggers this other event. So essentially it's not an event. We just want to listen to it. It's not at the beginning and it's not at the end. Basically just hit keep it to stream, and then you'll live happily ever after. So what I'm going to do then is, above that, I'm going to put down some blank keyframes randomly, not completely randomly, but I can move them around if I want to. So I want one here where that sound starts, and then quiet there. Or this is where the R starts. I'll close the properties box for now, and kind of, you could do this kind of who you choose to you you choose, so the S would come in there. To B. Then you get the B sound, and then we'll just E, B, and then it ends. Okay. So again, we're going to write on those layers, this layer called cues, but if I'm a little bit off, I can move it around and I can add more wherever I want to. And then what we write up here, we can transfer over to the exposure sheet. And the timeline up here has numbers that you can see, and the numbers are also up here. It says we're on frame 5. So what we'll do is we'll click on that first frame. Nothing happens. I'll just leave that blank. Right about 5. I'm going to open this up a little bit here. Right about there. Yeah, right there. I'm going to start writing you. Now I'm on that frame, and over in the properties box there's this thing called a label. It's saying we're looking for the properties of that frame, and this would be where, if you were writing code, this you could put information on it, and it would target that frame for something to happen. But we're going to sort of abuse the opportunity to write code. We're just going to write words, and the first word was you. Okay, so I'm going to write you, you. There's options here. Let's call it a name or a comment. Yeah, just comment. No, let's call it a name. Then it doesn't have those slashes in front of it. You. I'm going to move it down a little bit. Let's slide it down. I'm going to put more O's in it. And I have to type over here in this box, you. And then I can slide this down. And this would be the next one here. Or you could go R. And then I hit enter. Alright, so I'll go back over here to the name, and I'll go add more R's. So essentially what this is called, I'm reading the soundtrack. So wherever, go back up to here, just kind of get it, and then hit enter. Sorry. I'll slide this quiet zone down here. Want more R's. And enter. So I'm going to put this there. Who. We're clicking on W. H O who. Enter, right? And this is U. U. I'm going to bring this out a little bit. Move this down a little.
Who you choose.
Okay, so I think I have too many dots in there, but you can right click and you can clear a keyframe if you want to blow it away. It's not going to really change anything if that one stayed, but just so you know that none of this is like forever. If you want to change it, it's very flexible. So what we're doing is choose. So we'll click on that frame again right here. Choose. And I might just go Z. Choose. Enter. Oh, I got to put a lot more O's in there. Choose. All right, so you get the idea. That's how you do the reading of the soundtrack, and then you get 2B. I'll let you finish that up yourself later. That's the basic procedure. And then what you would do is you would get your blank exposure sheet out, which will look a little bit like this, and you transfer these into a column here corresponding to what you just did there. And you can keep scrubbing through it if you want to, and then you can proceed to do stop motion animation, and you'll have something. It should resemble something like this for whatever soundtrack you created. All right, so that's the simple version. Now, one of the things we do with Animate is use a little bit of digital puppets. So this was what this demo could also be used for, is if you had a library of nested phoneme shapes, basically mouth shapes. And when I say a nested phoneme shape, this little man here who came from the Friends of Ed cartoon flash book, it just basically has some mouth shapes that you can put into, and there's a side view. You can put these into a scene and you can use different mouth shapes. There's what we're looking for is 10 different mouth shapes, and they relate to specific sounds. This is provided to you too, the basic mouth shapes starting with the M, B, P, E, A, or A. The A is a little bit more open. We look for these 10 mouth shapes. Phonemes is what they call them, with the V and the F at the end, the L and the Th sound, oo, O. So you're using that as a guide, and then you can do this with your stop motion. But if you were working within the Flash environment completely, this is where we would, above these turns, this is see where we place one of those mouths from the library. It's a fairly extensive library. All the mouth shapes are in there, and there's a sort of 3/4 view of them. There's the front view here. This is what we call the A view. A view means it's the front view. So I'm just going to drag it out here, and you can see when you click inside of this A view mouth, there's these 10 mouth shapes, the phonemes. That's a nested series of mouth shapes. And out here on the timeline, you can request any one of those mouth shapes. This is the first mouth, but underneath, and I've selected a symbol. It's called an object. It's a graphic symbol, and it's saying it has some functions in looping. And one of the functions is frames. We can loop all of those frames, or we could pick one of the frames. And there's this thing called a frame picker. I could tell it I just want the I just want the 5th mouth shape, or I want the 4th mouth shape, or I want the, so you get familiar with what these sounds are, all right? And you would just tell it, I just want the single frame of that. That's what we do with these mouth shapes, with the frame picker, which is kind of a cool thing. When you have nested symbols, you get to pick which one you want. But that's, see, even in here, all 10 of them are in there, but we're just looking at the first one because he's not saying anything. Over here, yeah, that was just there for one frame. But essentially, all of these mouth shapes are in the library, and we're just sort of we actually calling them out. Here I just sort of tweened, so to reduce tween.
You are who you choose to be.
All right, so much for the puppet animation stuff, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of how to use this program to take your waveform, that you create yourself, bring it into Animate, and fool around with it, and then create your very own exposure sheet here, writing it down so you can do your stop motion, because the objective here is to do some really cool stop motion that uses the 10 phonemes to do some of the best lip sync that you've done so far. And that doesn't mean that you have to nail every single syllable, because actually when people are talking, they tend to blend some sounds together. So go ahead and videotape yourself doing the audio and try to interpret what the sounds are, what the phonemes are, what the mouth shapes are, and also what the performance is. Okay, so that's what I've got for a demo for you.